All right, first question, and we will ask Nick Brown to answer first. During consecutive debates in Spokane and Seattle, you both outlined a variety of responsibility of the Attorney General's office. If elected, what do you think the next Attorney General should prioritize?
Well, first of all, good evening, and thank you everyone for having this forum. Thank you to the Chronicle and Centralia College for hosting everybody, and thank you for everyone coming out today, and thank you for allowing a Democrat to come be heard as well. It's good to be here. I grew up in Washington in Pierce County. Both my parents were veterans and public servants. I started my legal career as an Army JAG lawyer, serving all over the country, all over the world, and I spent most of my work trying to keep people safe and fight for justice. And the job of the Attorney General, I think, is a continuation of that work. To be the advocate for the people of the state of Washington, to defend their rights, to represent them, and to create the best public law firm that we can on behalf of state government, to make sure the state government is serving the public as best as possible. A lot of people don't recognize how big of an agency this is. There's about 800 lawyers in the AG's office. We're the only state in the country that requires state government to be represented by only the Attorney General unless they're hiring outside counsel through the AG's office. So there are men and women all throughout the state AG's office who are working hard on a myriad of different challenges. I think the first and foremost priority is to keep people safe. This is something that I've been working on my entire career. I served as a prosecutor in the Department of Justice for many years, doing hundreds of cases against gun violence, drug trafficking, crimes against children, and I served as the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington, so the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for the entire western half of the state, leading all of the investigations that happens in this district. And we worked hard every day to try to keep people safe and to work with local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and the community on that immense challenge. And that is my number one priority moving forward, is to make sure that we are focused on how do we increase public safety, how do we use the office as a tool for good, how do we get out of the way when we need to get out of the way. And I bring decades of experience to that work, and I've been here in the back and listening to people's questions. I don't anticipate that you will agree with everything that I have to say, but I will always show up, and I will always do my best to listen, and I will always stay core to my ethics to try to lead this office forward. We've got big challenges, and I think I'm prepared to do that work going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll ask Pete Serrano, same question. If elected, what do you think the next Attorney General should prioritize?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Let's just try to get the volume here. We'll get the right guys. So thank you for having me. And the next Attorney General must be focused on the people of Washington. And there are three real critical elements to this. One, are they safe? Are we providing the proper tools to keep them safe? Two, are we actually looking after them? Is the Attorney General's office giving good advice to its legislative and agency clients to make sure that individual rights and civil rights are protected? And three, in looking internally, is the agency right-sized? Is it providing the right services? And so when I look at that, the first thing is making sure that the various folks have tools. I've talked with different sheriffs, I've talked with different police officers, and they've talked about asking for assistance from the Attorney General's office. And it's slow to come. We need to make sure that the boots on the ground, the people dealing with day-to-day issues, because I won't be there everywhere. We can't be everywhere. But the folks that are actually dealing with issues in your communities, the Attorney General's office stands to serve them. That's going to be priority number one, because that will trickle back to your community and making sure that whether it's law enforcement, whether it's a prosecutor, whether it's public defenders, they know that they have the Attorney General who will answer their questions. Similarly, your county commissioners may ask what's called an Attorney General's opinion, or your legislators. Hey, is this bill legal? How can we defend it? What's the question? There's so many opportunities for the Attorney General to actually be involved in the policy making, in the decision making, again, that comes back to your community. We have to make sure that the Attorney General is responsible for that. That will bring a safer community. The second one, again, making sure that the Constitution always sits at the forefront. Making sure that the advice given to the agencies, that they're staying within their bailiwicks, that they're not self-expanding, that they're not self-granting powers, that they're actually doing what they were, actually envisioned to do. That's going to be very critical in making sure that there's there's limitations on government overreach. We've got to pull that back. Then the third one, just making sure that the office is actually running at the proper level. Right now, there are 800 assistant attorneys general. There are about 800 staff. My understanding is the budget is somewhere around $250 million a year, plus the money that the AG brings back in through his affirmative lawsuits, like suing the opioid folks. Is that the right size for Washington? I can't tell you right now, but I assure you this. Part of my plan is to visit all 13 offices and really get in under the hood and work with my team. And then we'll figure out what the next priority is in setting our goals and our agency model.
All right, thank you. The second question will have Pete Serrano start and Nick Brown will follow. Dating back to 1981, the Attorney General of Washington State has proven to be a bipartisan elected office, with a Republican holding office for 20 years and a Democrat holding the office for 24 years. If elected, how would you work to ensure that Washingtonians of all political parties feel represented by your office?
Yeah, I think the most important part when you're talking about representing everyone is being out there and talking to everyone. I've intentionally visited places throughout this campaign that I'm not familiar with, whether it's 3rd and Pike in Seattle or just walking different parts of Seattle, going to different parts of Spokane, going to different counties out here on the west side. Getting to know the people and understanding their needs as the attorney elected to represent them is going to be hypercritical. Same thing, coming to the legislature on day one. Hey, here's what our core values as the office are. We're going to focus on the Constitution. We're going to focus on transparency. I want to work collaboratively with you, but if you're not willing to work with me, we're going to have some rough bumps. And that's true whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. The bottom line is that people desperately need to be served by the Attorney General, and we cannot overlook that. And so that will be at the forefront, and God willing, that means that the legislature, the agencies will all come on board and will be focused on your needs.
Well, I think it's a great question, and Pete and I have gotten to know each other a lot during the course of this campaign and casework as well. Can everybody hear me okay? We disagree on a lot of things, but I actually agree with him that the first thing we need to do is listen and show up, and it's part of the reason I wanted to be here today, knowing that this is a county that votes for mostly Republicans. But as your Attorney General, I will be the Attorney General for the people here as too. And I'm actually somewhat familiar with Lewis County. I grew up in Pierce County, as I said, for about 12 years. I went to summer camp in Mossy Rock, Washington, at the 4-H camp at Lake Mayfield. And so I'm familiar more than your average Seattle-based Democrat with some of the issues and culture and people here. And I will continue to do that outreach all the time that I'm the Attorney General. When I served as the U.S. Attorney, it's appointed by the President, so it's a partisan selection. But then as soon as you walk in the door, you drop any partisan or political work. You work and defend and represent everyone. I worked closely with community groups all throughout Western Washington, regardless of their politics, regardless of what they're believed in, and tried to find common ground about what we can do to improve community safety, to defend people's rights, and do that work forward. And oftentimes that was working with people that I knew disagreed with me, and that was okay. And I'm going to continue to show up and listen and do my best, and if we disagree, then we can disagree. But I want to make sure that I'm using that office as a tool for justice, for safety, and to make sure that we're providing the best legal services for everyone in the state. And there's going to be times where there's going to be disagreements, but that's the nature of our democracy. It's not always clean and easy. Sometimes it's messy. But being a listener and showing up and being able to have those conversations is something that I've been doing my entire career as a lawyer and a leader, and I will continue to do that work as the Attorney General.
Thank you. Question number 3. The Attorney General of Washington is tasked with overseeing an office that includes 800 attorneys who provide legal service to more than 230 state agencies, boards, and commissions. What previous experience do you believe has best prepared you for this role? We'll ask Nick Brown to start.
No, absolutely. And it's, as we've said, it's a huge agency with massive scope. And managing a team of men and women across 13 different offices and 1,500 to 1,600 people I think requires immense experience. And I've been leading people and agencies for a very long time. Most recently, as the U.S. Attorney, I led a large public law firm. I know what it's like to come in, build a strategic plan, and try to execute on that, working with the team and working with the public. That requires some experience to get used to that leadership responsibility, and I think I can build upon that. But that, being U.S. Attorney, was not a new experience for me. When I was brand new in the Army, as an Army JAG lawyer, working with people from all across the country, one of the very first jobs I had as a JAG was leading the Army Free Income Tax Center when I was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas. And all of a sudden, I was a green second lieutenant, fresh out of law school, and I was responsible for managing about 15 NCOs and enlisted folks with their training, with their management, and with their evaluation. And I was 25 years old. And it was a great opportunity to build upon over the last 20 years about what it takes to lead and what it takes to communicate. Because we can't be everywhere. And it's important that you come in with a strategy, that you communicate that strategy, and that you entrust the people in the office to do the right thing. That you empower people who have been career, nonpartisan, apolitical lawyers and staff members trying to serve the public. So building upon my experience, I think I have a great foundation to come into the door starting in January of next year and lead that office with as much credibility and distinction as I can.
Thank you. Pete Serrano, what previous experience do you believe has prepared you best for this role?
Yeah, I think there's both previous and current experience. Currently I'm the mayor of Pasco. It's one of the fastest growing cities. If you're not familiar, it's down on the east side. When I moved here 9 years ago, it was just shy of 60,000 people. It's now over 80,000 people. We have hundreds of millions of dollars of spending in our budget every 2 years. It's a $250 million, so it's $125 million a year. That type of management that comes through our staff, that comes through city council, I'm an integral part of that, making sure that we're spending our money right and we're right-sizing the workers that we have in place. So as the elected official of that body, it's always incumbent on me to make sure that we're making the right policy decisions. And I think that is going to reflect internally, bringing that level of leadership where I'm entrusted in my community, earning the trust, earning your votes, the votes of the citizens of Washington to put me over the hump. That's what I've been doing for the past 9 months while I've been campaigning, seeking to earn your trust and letting you know that I'll be held accountable in this office. Similarly, I've led multi-billion-dollar projects, interdisciplinary projects, whether it's in the environmental and energy field, which I left to start a nonprofit organization, or whether it's in the ports and infrastructure field. I've worked with people all across the board, and we've got things done. Even in California, permitting a multi-billion-dollar project to make sure that we actually had the ability to bring the energy infrastructure in. That was necessary. It took leadership, it took involvement in the community, it took, private citizens, and it took leadership from the elected officials. My team had to put that all together, and I apologize, it actually wasn't multi-billion, it was multi-100 million, 25-acre project. And that type of leadership, you've got to keep working and growing into, and I'm grateful to have that experience.
Thank you. Our fourth question, we'll start with you, Pete Serrano. In June, current Attorney General Bob Ferguson announced that following a lawsuit, Johnson & Johnson had agreed to pay state, city, and county governments more than $123 million to combat the opioid epidemic. Part of a $1.29 billion the Attorney General's office has recovered to address the fentanyl and opioid crisis. As Attorney General, what additional actions will you take to help address the rise in opioid use and deaths?
Yeah, there's no question that's the starting point, but that needs to be continued. I remember as a city council member when the settlement was first announced, how excited we were. We saw what the share of Pasco was based on a per capita ratio, and it was several $1 million. We were going to invest that into a treatment center and a living facility for folks that needed that. But then the Attorney General looked at pulling back. Now, granted, he ended up with more money. It was very concerning, though, when we didn't know what was going to happen with those funds. So I will continue to pursue that litigation. I will continue to make sure that we look at holding all individuals accountable. We need to make sure that it's not just the manufacturers anyone that's in the stream of commerce distributing. We need to make sure that we also regulate the medical professionals, that they're not over-prescribing or too loosely prescribing. And obviously, when it comes to the opioid epidemic, as well as the fentanyl crisis, we need to make sure that we're utilizing our criminal resource tools. Those will be in conjunction either with the United States Attorney's Office, with your local police officers, making sure that grant funds, making sure that tools and information is available, that it's shared, and making sure that we have enough staff to where we have the ability to prosecute, or your prosecutor needs an assistant, that we provide those warm bodies to actually litigate the matters. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I think what's a field that's ripe to protect the people of Washington. Again, obviously making sure that there's adequate support in the criminal division and adequate support across the state to make sure there's penalties associated with that, whether it's coming in from the northern, southern, or port borders, whether it's coming across state lines, or whether it's coming internally. We've got to make sure that we're fighting to keep our people and our streets safe and clean.
Thank you. All right, what additional actions will you take to help address the rise in opioid use and deaths?
Well, first and foremost, I think we have to treat this as the public health crisis and justice crisis that it really is. We are all 1 degree of separation away from someone who has been impacted by opioid addiction or the fentanyl crisis. I'm sad that Washington and Oregon for the last couple of years have been in the top 5 of youth overdose deaths when it comes to fentanyl in America. And I think part of the reason that we have that severe problem is that we have not treated it with the urgency that we need. And I will tell you, as the United States Attorney for Western Washington, addressing the fentanyl crisis was the #1 type of case that we did in an office. Prosecuting principally Mexican-based drug cartels, bringing drugs up through the I-5 corridor. But not just that, homegrown dealers as well. And we focus on the border, but drugs are coming into our community from the mail, from the ports, and from the airports as well. And it really does take an all-hands-deck approach. And part of the reason that we have the severe fentanyl crisis that we have now is because we did not address and regulate opioids in the way that we needed to from the beginning. If you look at other countries in this world, they are not dealing with the same type of fentanyl crisis that we're dealing with. And a part of that reason is that they did not, because they heavily regulated opioid medication from the beginning, where the United States took more of a handoff approach. So I really applaud A.G. Ferguson and AGs across this country who have been aggressive in going off after manufacturers. Because we have not only dealt with some of the root cause problems, returning money back to people that need it, but we've continued to generate revenue for the state of Washington through that work. The AG's office is actually one of the few agencies in government that is a revenue generator because of the affirmative litigation that we do on behalf of the public. By suing companies, by suing people that are defrauding the public, by protecting vulnerable populations in particular, it brings back money. And it's been good to see that work throughout opioids, and we will continue that work under the next administration.
Thank you. Recent attempts to overhaul the state's juvenile justice system have resulted in overpopulation at Green Hill School and other juvenile rehabilitation facilities, a spike in crime at those facilities, understaffing, and calls for additional reforms. As Attorney General, what do you think can be done to address the issues of juvenile rehabilitation in Washington? Brown.
Well, I've been a lawyer now for 22 years. The vast majority of that time as a prosecutor or as a defense lawyer. When I started my career in the Army as a criminal lawyer, I was actually a defense lawyer representing people, soldiers, mostly young, from across the country, accused of crimes. And so I've spent much of my time in and around the justice system. And when it comes to children in particular, youth, that are victims of crimes or causing crimes, it is some of the messiest and most challenging types of cases that we work on. And anyone that wants to promise you simple solutions for this, it simply is just not being honest. And I can tell you on decades of experience of doing this work and seeing the impact that we have on our youth in particular, it is hard. Because we are dealing with children who are often committing very serious crimes, firearm violence in particular. But we're also dealing with a population whose brain development or doesn't develop in the same way that it does for adults, that don't have the competency and capacity to make the same types of decisions that adults do. And so I do think we have to treat children differently than we treat our adult populations. So in terms of how we punish them, how we work on their rehabilitation, and we have massive problems with respect to their safety, their care, and their needs. and all of the public expense related to that. And so I think we need to continue to innovate and make sure that we're looking anew at these challenges. As the Attorney General, it will be part of my responsibility to advise all the state agencies that are dealing with some of these very difficult problems, and to be an advocate with the legislature to make sure they're crafting policy that gets to some of these root cause problems that we're having around the crimes that youth are committing. And I know based on my experience that I can bring that to bear, that can bring that leadership down to Olympia and work collectively, but it's going to be hard and it's going to take the community's investment as well.
Pete Serrano, as Attorney General, what do you think can be done to address the issue of juvenile rehabilitation in Washington?
Yeah, as Nick said, this is a multifaceted issue. There's not going to be one piece of the pie that's going to solve this. It's the whole pie. I will tell you this, while I disagree with the current Attorney General on many things, he recently signed on to a letter with, I believe, 20 other Attorneys General, requesting that the Surgeon General put out a warning, like a black box type warning that you receive for medication about online media, specifically social media. I think that's going to be part of our root cause, is working with, with other attorneys general across the aisle, presumably, to make sure that our children have that we regulate the material that they're receiving through those social media companies. Especially since we saw Mark Zuckerberg just recently testify that Facebook was actually feeling the pain of its First Amendment rights infringed on from the Biden administration. They were censored effectively. We're going to need to work. This social media has become such an integral part, especially of children's lives. We absolutely need to make sure that they are warned and forewarned of the content they're consuming. So I think that's one of the real critical things. And I understand that doesn't always dovetail neatly into the juvenile justice system, but I think that's one of the parts that people like, I'm 44. I didn't grow up dealing with these types of things. They talk about the brain development that we've had is very different than juveniles. So we need to really look at what's surrounding these kids and how can we protect them from these bad issues. And so that's step number one. I think, another issue is just making sure that there's a proper funding, that the programs that are provided for these types of, for these children is actually to make sure that they have the ability to recover. Recovery is going to be so critical. And so I see my time's up, but that's kind of the starting point.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few audience questions. I believe we have time for 3, and we'll give you each 1 minute to respond to the question.
I got one for Nick. One question. Do you think Washington is headed in the right direction as a whole?
It's interesting. I've having been campaigning now for the last year and a half. I think that's the first time I've been asked that specific question, so I appreciate it. In general, I think yes. I think Washington has continued to do a lot of things right. I think we have big challenges as well. But if you're asking me on balance if we're headed in the right direction, I would say yes.
All right, we're going to give both candidates an opportunity to respond to each question. So would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I think there are a lot of things that Washington needs to really work towards. I think we are failing. We're failing our children in particular. We're failing them in education. We've got funding, but we're not providing results. We're not providing the right type of education. We've got so many other issues associated with, as Nick mentioned, we're one of the top 2 states that are caught up in the fentanyl crisis. Part of that is drug decriminalization. Part of that is soft on crime policies. It took the people's voice through the initiative process to get our police back to do most of their jobs. Still not fully there. And it took a lot of wind out of their sails, talking with our local law enforcement in Pasco, where we've been extremely supportive and well-funded. Those guys and gals are still hurting from what we did to them. So I think Washington's on and about course, and I look forward to being part of that solution in January.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Bob Gunther here again. This question is for both of you. For 20 years, Lewis County has been receiving municipal biosolids on farm ground. I sued the Washington State Department about that pollution I thought was being delivered from municipal solid waste to the ground. Would either or both of you folks be willing to look further into that if elected to see if we are actually polluting our groundwater in Lewis County? This is where a lot of pollution is, a lot of municipal solid wastes are being dumped. There's 187,000 tons of municipal solid waste being dumped on farm ground in the state of Washington every year.
All right, we'll start with Pete.
Sure. I appreciate the question, and I'm not going to deflect it. I would say this is going to be a Department of Ecology thing, but I look forward to advising the DOE on that. I've spent, the bulk of my 15-year legal career in environmental law, dealt with municipal solid issues as well as code issues related thereto. I'll have the opportunity to really understand what ecology is looking at, and so I'll bring the real skill set and time in the trenches, if you will, understanding this issue. And so I happily look at it. I think it's something that we need to protect our environment for our kids, for our future generations. And that's not just the environment, but that's also making sure we protect our energy resources. And I'm proud to have worked on some, very forward-thinking energy projects in my time on the Department of Energy Hanford site and Energy Northwest.
Bob, I think you're going to get the prize for the most questions this evening. But I appreciate it. And so, to the bottom line, yes, absolutely happy to take a look at it. I'm not familiar with the issue that you've raised, but I do think it's really important for the AG not only to work with the Department of Ecology, the Department of Natural Resources, and the other state agencies that have direct responsibility, but to also be an independent leader on issues protecting our environment. It's one of the reasons that I love being a Washingtonian. I've been here since I came up at 2 years old, and this is my home, and I think we need to do everything that we can to protect and defend it and make it healthy. And so to the extent there's a problem with past state practices, absolutely committed to looking at it.
I'll send my case number to whoever's elected.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. First of all, I want to say congratulations on your appointment previously for being the first Black U.S. Attorney in Western Washington. I think that's a great achievement. We've talked about the fentanyl crisis. There's been over 300,000 Americans that have overdosed and died in fentanyl in the last 4 years. As Attorney General, U.S. Attorney for this area, you made some statements to public, a KNKX public station, that you felt that the war on drugs was a failure, and that you wanted to start looking at other alternatives to addressing the fentanyl crisis. With respect, sir, that's your failure because you have been the U.S. Attorney under that watch, and you said yourself that the amount of fentanyl deaths has become a public health crisis. Now, we all, as you said, are one step away from knowing somebody or having seen somebody who's died from this epidemic. Given your record, honestly, of failure as the U.S. Attorney, how can we trust you to address this problem as the next Attorney General of Washington State?
Well, I appreciate the question, genuinely, and I am incredibly proud of my record. You can go to the U.S. Attorney's website, read all of the cases that happened under my watch, prosecuting people, drug cartel members, people dealing drugs in this community, and all across question marks, people causing harm with firearms, people injuring children. I'm incredibly proud of my record. We've had massive problems in this state and in this country when it comes to the fentanyl crisis and the overdose deaths that we're facing, and we need to do more. But I proudly will stand behind everything that I've done. What I think that it takes, however, to continue to make progress is real-world experience trying these cases. I've done hundreds of investigations, multi-jurisdiction, working collectively with law enforcement to try to address these problems. And I do believe that the war on drugs was a problem because I think we approached it simply as a war, not only as a criminal justice problem, but the public health problem that it is. I think we can do everything possible to treat this only as a criminal justice problem and incarcerate and hold people accountable. But we also need to get to some of the root cause problems that keeps driving people back to drug addiction. And that's part of the reason that I think it was a failure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pete, do you have a response as well?
Sure. So I'm not Nick. If you get them noticed. But the reality is, we can always do more and we can always do better. I look at the opportunity that I've had to meet people over the past 9 months that are affected by this. This is whether it's a family member that's died, whether it's an individual that's in the middle of addictions. And I'll tell you this, initially, I brought the son of the cop mindset. Just lock them up and let it go. As I talk with people out on the streets, whether it's Seattle, Spokane, Pasco, elsewhere, there's so many layers to this addictive behavior. Obviously, the most important part is making sure it gets off our streets, doesn't come in through external forces like our borders. That's naive to say that we're going to fix that tomorrow. So as we fix it, we need to fix on healing the people that are in the throes of addictions. We need to give them resources to recover, and the Attorney General's office can do that with some of the award that we talked about they've won. So I look forward to spending those resources on cleaning our streets up.
Thank you. We've actually been asked to extend the question period because apparently behind us there's a lot of interest. So if you're willing, we'll take a few more questions for you, Jimmy.
Okay.
Thank you both for being here. I have 2 quick questions. We're back here. Yeah, so one, if you had to envision and identify the greatest failure of the sitting AG outside of trans youths or unhoused or drugs or the border, what would that be and how would you address it differently? And secondly, when are we going to allow our law enforcement officers and sheriffs to stop playing tag, cuff, and release and get our judicial system back in order?
Sure. Is that coming to me first?
Yeah, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take those in turn backwards first. I'm a big supporter of law enforcement, not just because, like I mentioned, that's what my father did. I've been endorsed by awesome organizations like Seattle Police Officers Guild yesterday and King County Police Officers Guild, as well as sheriffs and sitting prosecutors. We desperately need to get them their resources, and like I said earlier, I've talked with prosecuting attorneys, and they've mentioned the fact that Bob Ferguson will kind of stall out some of his assistants. I look forward to jumping right in and saying, what can I get you to help you do your jobs? So that's number one, and making sure the law enforcement know I've got their back. That said, when there's a bad apple, that bad apple needs to be made known, and we need to handle that business. As to what Bob's biggest failure is, I'll just say it. He should have stood for our daughters in Title IX, and he failed to do that.
So we've had a lot of discussion today, just in this portion of the conversation, about working with law enforcement and the need to keep that moving forward. It's been the bulk of my career trying to be supportive and work with law enforcement. And I've had some pretty strong disagreements with law enforcement as well. But I always try to approach that with an open mind and with hearing the hard work that they're doing. I know how hard it is to be on the front lines of some of the problems that we've had. One of the best calls that I got as a candidate was early in the campaign, and I got a call from someone from a leading law enforcement organization and said, hey, whatever you need on the campaign, let me know. And it's not because I've always agreed with you, but it's because you've always approached me with respect and with an open ear. And I'm going to continue that work going forward and help the legislature draft good policy. I'm going to bring that experience. I think, the one thing that I'll be different than Bob Ferguson is that the bulk of my career is about public safety and criminal justice issues, and I want to lean into that more than I've seen in the last 12 years.
Thank you. Another question?
Yes, I have a question. I'd like to start with you, and I'd like to hear Pete follow up. So, Nick, you're a Democrat, and so this is the reason I'm addressing you first, is because they have been very supportive of sanctuary cities. And so I want to know your opinion and your viewpoint, because as just a person out there, I've read so many stories of how they were trying to get this guy or woman, whoever the bad person was, and they couldn't go in and get him because the sanctuary cities shut him off. You can't come in. And I've heard that time and time again. So how do you feel about sanctuary cities?
So I think first and foremost, I stand on the legacy that Washington State has as being a very inclusive and welcoming state. And that is my value. And it's not a new value, and it's not new to Washington State. Last week we saw the passing of Dan Evans, a tremendous Republican governor here in Washington State. And part of his tremendous legacy, the thing that he was applauded for at the time, was making sure that Washington was the first state in the country to welcome Vietnamese refugees into Washington after the Vietnam War because of the travesties that they were facing in their home country. And I have been proud to be from Washington in part because of that spirit of welcoming people into this community. And we as a state need to make sure that we are protecting people's rights here because they have rights no matter where they come. And I've heard some of the stories sometimes that maybe you're referring to as well, and I've also seen when those stories aren't bearing out. And I've worked with law enforcement and I've worked with the community around some of these issues. And I know how important it is to make sure that the people that are here have their rights protected as well, and I will continue to do that as Attorney General.
I appreciate the question. There's no question that when folks come here, they're looking for a better life. That's what makes America amazing. That's what the opportunity in this land is. Now, there's a difference of coming here legally. There's several visa processes. There's an opportunity to work in the ag fields, like down where I am, and also out here too. There are opportunities to take advantage, and I don't mean take advantage of, but to utilize the proper legal process. When folks come here through that process, we need to make sure they're protected. When folks come here illegally, we need to make sure that we are keeping our own backyard safe. We need to make sure that the folks that are here that are legally, they have the protections afforded to a citizen or a resident of the United States. For those who aren't here, we need to let them know that they're welcome to come back. They're welcome to come back through the proper channels, and that's where we need to be on that.
One more question back there, please.
This will be our last question.
You gentlemen are going to be the Attorney General, one of you are. What do you think of the present Attorney General using his office to promote his running for governor? Do you think that's legal or allowed, or is it just a wonderful thing to do?
I think this comes to me. Here's how I'll promote my office. I'll continually talk to you. That's my job. We're going to represent your interests in Olympia and throughout the state of Washington. And my job will be to make sure that you receive the information of what we're doing through the Attorney General's office, that the investment of your tax dollars are well known to you. It's not going to be a political stunt. It's not going to be a ploy. It's not going to be something that highlights me. In fact, I got a question the other day about how will you highlight women in your office, and I took the opportunity to explain that right now in the organization that I run, I'm highlighting the attorneys that work for us, a woman and a man, because they're doing great work. I want to make sure that people understand that there's a team of assistant attorneys general, and it's not going to be about me. It's not going to be about making a splash. It's going to be about protecting your rights and utilizing those tax dollars on your behalf. So that's what I'll be about.
Do you know what the last 12 Attorney Generals have in common? They've all run for higher office. Most of them for governor, one for senator, and it might not surprise you that sometimes politicians aspire to higher office. I want to make sure that we are using the public office as the Attorney General for the public good, and being vocal, being engaged, being present, and championing the work that we're doing on behalf of the public. That is what I did when I was U.S. Attorney, that I was always trying to be in the community, explaining to what the great work of was happening from our team. I did not use the office to raise my own profile. I will not use the Attorney General's office to raise my own profile, but I will use it to champion the great work that we will do on behalf of the public. And I think that's a very important leadership effort and work and responsibility to have.
Thank you both so much for being here this